Sunday morning. I'm Jaden Jefferson, and welcome to Community Focus. This morning, I am joined by Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Toledo, Joel Voss. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on today. And my first question for you is that we have all right here in Northwest Ohio been watching this Russia-Ukraine crisis play out. So kind of give me an idea of how that could affect us here at home or is affecting us here at home.
Well, I think what we're already seeing are increasing gas prices. I think there are already conversations ongoing about supply chain issues that, of course, have already been pretty bad because of COVID-19. So those are the two main things, of course. The community is getting pretty fired up about the invasion, which is, I think, nice to see. There was a rally, of course, yesterday, or Thursday, excuse me, at UT. But I think that's the main thing, right? I think you're going to see some tightening of the belts around Northwest Ohio, and largely with the things that you've already seen a tightening of the belt with.
I know when this situation first started, it was very confusing. Not many people knew exactly why this was happening. So can you give people kind of a brief history of Ukraine's relationship with Russia?
Yeah, well, the truth is we still don't really know why this is happening. But the short answer is Ukraine and Russia have quite a long history. If I were going to simplify it, I would go back to say the Soviet Revolution, which created the Soviet Union, right, in the turn of the last century, early 1900s, where Ukraine joined the Soviet Union. And then after that, of course, you have World War II. And then you have the Cold War, where Ukraine was, of course, part of the Soviet Union. And like most satellite states, it was pretty unhappy with not having its independence. And then in 1991, the Soviet Union collapses, and you see all the former satellites like slowly leave the Soviet Union, or excuse me, Russia at that time. And that's what Ukraine did. That was a really short version, right?
Yes, and I know watching this play out now, many people are probably wondering what's going on in the mind of Russia's President Vladimir Putin. So would you kind of give us an idea of what could possibly be going through his mind?
I really wish I knew what was going through his mind. But here's the thing, that so I'm a political scientist by trade, and generally we believe that people are rational. So even though this seems abhorrent to us, even though many people, argue that he's crazy, I think that he's rational. I think he knows what he's doing. I think he's doing this because he thinks he could get away with it, because he got away with the Georgia conflict in 2008. He got away with Crimea, which of course was part of Ukraine in 2014. And he's gotten away with a lot of different cyber attacks and election interference in Eastern and Western Europe, and of course the United States. And so I think with COVID, with a lot of political infighting across Europe and in the United States, and because we had very weak reactions last time, I think he thought he could get away with it. Now, the real question, and I have no answer at all for this, is, why now, as opposed to 6 months ago or 6 months later or, a year ago? That part, we don't quite know yet.
What would you say is the U.S.'s role in this crisis? Because the U.S. is involved in a lot of different things happening around the globe. So in this particular situation, how is the U.S. involved?
Well, a couple of different ways, right? So the United States is the most important military in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. And so NATO expanded all the way to the borders of Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And so I think the US's decision to do that has probably played some role in Putin's animosity towards the US. The United States has also created a global international economic order that has helped Western democracies, including the United States. We did that after World War II. So I think those are two reasons that Putin has been pretty upset with the US. Now, with Ukraine specifically, NATO is not directly involved because Ukraine is not a member of NATO. NATO is a collective security organization. Ukraine is also, of course, not part of the European Union, which is not a collective security organization. And so what you're going to see in the conflict right now is the US pressing sanctions. Originally, sanctions were meant as a deterrence, which means, don't do this. And now they're used as compellents, which means stop doing this. And that's really what we're doing right now. On top of that, we are going to send money and supplies to Ukrainians. At some point, I'm sure we'll start accepting refugees, but you won't see direct military conflict between the US and Russia, because that would be honestly catastrophic. Prior to that, the United States tried its best, I think, to stop the invasion. That's why you saw President Biden sort of coming out with all this stuff that Russia's going to invade anytime soon, anytime now. And I think a lot of us didn't think that was true. And clearly we were very wrong.
NATO has been a hot topic recently, and it has played a big role in this whole debacle here. So give people an idea of what NATO is and why Russia's so concerned about Ukraine possibly joining NATO.
Yeah, sure. So NATO is a collective security organization. And what that means in its simplest terms is that if you invade one country in that collective security organization, you in essence invade all of them. And so why does that matter? Well, because if you wanted to invade, say, Norway, which is a member of NATO, Norway doesn't have a very robust defense, excuse me. But, you know, if Germany and the United States and many other European countries were part of NATO, then suddenly, right, Norway looks very risky as as a target of invasion. And so really what NATO is meant to do is deter any future aggression, specifically from Russia, because this is a Cold War organization, right? So not really China, you know, not really North Korea, but specifically Russia in this case. Ukraine, now historically, Ukraine has been part of Russia, and there's real ties to Russian, there's real ties between the people of Ukraine and Russia. So that's one reason that Russia wouldn't want Ukraine to join NATO, or the European Union for that matter. But the real specific reason is if they did that, NATO would have Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, not Belarus, but then Ukraine. And of course, Finland and Sweden are all also not members of NATO. But in essence, what you've got is an entire flank that would be bordering Russia's western side. Turkey is also a member of NATO. And so, in other words, you'd have Russia essentially, you know, bordering nearly all NATO states, and that is highly problematic for their security.
How do you see this dispute coming to an end?
Well, that is another difficult question. If you would have asked me this a week ago, I would have said that I think there are 5 or 6 options. Now I think those options are dwindling, and I think really you've got 2 options and really maybe just 1 option. I'll go with the second option real quick. And that is Russia fails miserably in their invasion, and then they're forced to compromise. And Ukraine will have to compromise too. And so what this compromise will end up being is Crimea to Russia. Ukraine promises not to join NATO. Ukraine promises to demilitarize, which means that they don't have sort of NATO artillery and things of that sort in the country. And probably Russia would get the Donbass region also, which is the region that they just took over right before the invasion started. Now, Russia's invasion was going pretty poorly to start, right? Like almost historically poorly. But Russia's military is large and it is sophisticated and it is capable of leveling cities. And so just because it started poorly doesn't mean that it will continue to be to be done poorly. So I think, you know, if it goes on for another couple of weeks of being a pretty bad invasion, I think you might see a compromise. But I think we're already seeing that turn, right? You're already seeing the massive bombardments of some cities. And so the other way that this could end is he essentially treats Ukraine like Chechnya, which Russia fought a long war with, or maybe Aleppo in Syria, where Russia leveled the city. And so in other words, what you would see is Russia going in and leveling cities. And they're already committing war crimes. And I think what you would see is that would just be exacerbated dramatically. And so what would that end up looking like? Well, I think you'd see an annexation of Crimea, which means that an annexation of all of Ukraine. So Russia takes all of Ukraine, they say that it's theirs. And then at that point, you have urban warfare and mass resistance by Ukrainians. So it would look a lot like their Chechen war, or like the United States fighting in Iraq, right, in our most recent history. That coupled with sanctions, which are dramatic right now. I mean, they really are dramatic in Russia. I think you see a mass protest in the streets, violence from the Russian government against the protesters. And I think probably ultimately this ends in like a coup attempt. Does it end with Putin out of office? I'm skeptical, but I think you're going to see tens of thousands of lives lost in Ukraine, millions of refugees, and probably mass unrest in Russia too.
So it's definitely a situation that we'll be following closely in the days, weeks, and months to come. Dr. Joel Voss, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Toledo, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.